Rethinking Creativity. Perhaps the most famous commentator on creativity and art and AI is Margaret Bowden. She defines three types of creativity: combinatorial creativity, exploratory creativity, and transformational creativity. And she has written extensively about the question of creativity in terms of art in general and also in terms of AI itself. For her, creativity is the ability to generate novel and useful ideas. And she makes a distinction between what she calls H creativity or historical creativity and P or personal creativity. Historical creativity is something that has been it's the first time in history, and personal creativity is the first time any particular person has created such a thing. So combinatorial creativity, in her terms, produces unfamiliar combinations of familiar ideas and works by making associations between ideas that were only indirectly linked. An example of this perhaps could be the world of collage, where you're bringing together elements from a variety of backgrounds to create a new work of art. Meanwhile, exploratory creativity is based on a culturally accepted style of thinking or conceptual space, defined by a set of generative rules. Examples include painting, architecture, music, and artistic production in general. And here she's referring to shapegram, the use of shapegram in architecture, for example. This is the work of Emmanuel Ko, a Singapore based AI architect, where he's done a study on the various Bauhauses that there could be. In the center, the Bauhaus that we know as the Bauhaus, but then it generated a range of other possible Bauhauses. There's also a book by George Steimy that uses shape grammar to create a range of different possible Palladian villas based on the rules that Palladio used for the villas that we know that he already designed. Then transformational creativity is for Bowden the most important form of creativity. For her, it is where the space or style is transformed by altering or dropping one or more of its defining dimensions. Science offers some of the best examples where paradigmatic shifts in knowledge can occur. This can lead to surprising or even shocking results, as something that might have been generated that could never have been previously imagined. And one thinks here of advances in science that might have won a Nobel Prize as being an example of this form of creativity. And others have followed this logic, the logic of Margaret Bowden. For example, Marcus de Sauté, the author of The Creative Code, Art and Innovation in the Age of AI, remarks that he himself, my recipe for listing original work in students follows Bowden's three types of creativity. But isn't there something wrong with this approach towards creativity? In fact, Arthur Miller, in his book, The Artist and the Machine, The World of AI-Powered Creativity, comments that Bowden's criteria focus on the product rather than the process. And this seems to me to be really where the most challenging aspect of our approach. Should we not understand creativity in terms of the process of creativity itself? Creativity might be involved in generating a design, but creativity surely is what feeds the process. It's not necessarily what characterizes the outcome. Indeed, for many designers, creativity is a question of how the design process unfolds in relation to the affordances of the materials and the tools being used. What applies to design also applies to all fields of creativity. As Ben Chevennet has commented, sculpture is in the result. Sculpture is not in the result. The sculpture is in the process. It makes little sense, therefore, to judge creativity in terms of the outcome of the process. This would be akin to judging a building in terms of its style. Bowden's approach, then, tends to reduce creativity to a limited range of outcomes. But should not creativity be understood as a pervasive sensibility that is infused throughout the behavior of a creative individual and expressed in various ways. Would creative individuals not express their creativity in every facet of their existence, from the way they dress and behave through to the actual works they produce? Besides, we are never likely to fully comprehend the nature of the creative process, since, as Arthur Miller has also argued, much of it belongs to the realm of the unconscious. And this brings us to the question that raised by Melanie Mitchell. To be creative, you have to be conscious that you're being creative. The question, though, is whether we're fully conscious of what we do, and to what extent there are some things that are produced of which we are not fully conscious. Indeed, for Freud, fantasies can be expressed in sublimated form in the creative act. The creative individual might therefore be unaware of what influences the creative process, and that's exactly the position taken by Max Tegmark. In other words, that often consciousness is a kind of after the fact summary or appreciation of what has been produced, and perhaps the creative moment is a little bit more like the kind of the light bulb moment when suddenly an idea comes to us and then we begin to appreciate it. In other words, maybe consciousness kicks in after the creative act as a way of appreciating that work. But I think we have to question much more about what Margaret Bowden's has put forward. We must challenge the notion that creativity can be judged in such an objective fashion. Who is in a position to even judge creativity? And what if a creative act is not recognized by that judge? Could we not say that Van Gogh was creative, even though his creative abilities were not recognized in his lifetime? And how could we appraise the creativity of Move 37 in the match between Lisa Doll and AlphaGo if the creativity of that move was not recognized until 100 moves later? Might we even draw a distinction between human creativity and absolute creativity, just as we have drawn a distinction between human intelligence and absolute intelligence? Does creativity perhaps lie in the eye of the beholder, or does creativity exist in the mind of the creative individual? In order to fully understand the creative process, should we not take into account the background sensibilities and aspirations that feed into that process? And does it even make sense to distinguish between P creativity, between personal creativity, and H creativity, historical creativity? What if an individual creates something without knowing whether someone else has created it before? In short, is it not time to revisit the question of creativity? Is it not time to rethink creativity? Here I want to introduce Demis Hassabis, who was behind AlphaGo, and he rethinks the logic of creativity through AlphaGo itself.
But let's think about creativity sort of more generally. Here's another definition of creativity that I think I got out of the Oxford Dictionary: the ability to use skill and imagination to produce something new. And I think there are at least three types of creativity, or three levels of creativity, if you like. So the first type, if you imagine that you're given three or more examples in a particular topic, and let's imagine for the moment that the green dots are these examples, and the white box is a particular topic or field of endeavor. And you're asked to create something new. So one way you could do that is what I call interpolation. And it's used often in machine learning and AI as an AI term. And interpolation you can think of as kind of like an averaging. So, here are three training examples, here are three examples of things we would like from this world of possibilities, and you kind of find an average of those things. And in some sense, that orange dot is new, right? It's different from the examples, and it's something new. But it's still sort of contained within the space, this green dotted green line, the space that the examples cover. The next level of creativity, which is a higher level of creativity, would be extrapolation. So now you have those examples, but instead of just finding an average, you're extending the boundaries of what you already know. So this would be the blue dots, and you can see those three blue dots as outside of the boundaries that's sort of marked out by the training examples, the green dots. And then finally, there's what I would call invention or innovation, which is here represented by the yellow dot that's outside the white box completely. And this is something completely new, perhaps informed in some way by what's inside the box. Now, how are we doing on the AI front with these levels of creativity? So let's examine machine creativity. And neural network systems, the kind of systems I showed you, sometimes the fashionable ones are called deep learning these days. They're pretty good at interpolation. They're massive statistical machines, if you like, and they're very good at averaging things and spotting patterns in data. Then you have things, AlphaGo-like systems, which are getting pretty good, I would say, at extrapolation. Finding new things beyond the boundaries of even what the human designers knew about, but still within the same general context. And then you've got true invention, which I think no AI systems are anywhere close to yet. Right? So this would be, instead of coming up with an original move in Go, it would be inventing Go, right? Or inventing chess. And there's no systems that are able to do that, right? We can come up with, I think AlphaGo definitely demonstrated extrapolation. It wasn't just averaging what humans have done before or mimicking what humans have done before. It was coming up with genuinely new ideas, but it can't invent something truly new. So you might ask, well, what's missing? Well, although AI systems have been pretty successful so far, there's actually a whole bunch of things that we still need and are still need to crack. And things like concepts, abstract thinking, reasoning by analogy, memory systems, and imagination, which, as we just saw earlier, is in many of the definitions of creativity. And a lot of these terms, a lot of these ideas and capabilities are missing from our current AI systems. And this is where the cutting edge of AI research is at the moment, and we're working variously hard on all these different topics I've just mentioned. And I think those things are key to this invention or this out-of-the-box thinking, because I think a lot of that comes from interdisciplinary thinking, spotting unusual connections between different subjects, and doing things like imagining counterfactuals, right? So imagining fantastical scenarios. And a lot of our creativity, I believe, comes from those capabilities that we currently don't have in our AI systems.
To my mind, what makes this interesting is the difference between his interpretations of creativity and those of Margaret Bowden. There is admittedly a similarity between them in the sense that Bowden's transformational creativity, which is the kind of key type, reminds you in some sense of Hassabis's notion of true invention. But they are different in many ways. My suspicion is that Bowden is working with symbolic AI, which was dominant around in the time that she was writing about creativity, whereas Denis Hassabis is clearly referring to neural networks, to deep learning, where you have different forms of creativity. In fact, Daniel Bolojan uses the term interpolation to refer to what happens with style GANs, in that you're working from a limited data set, and therefore you can only interpolate something from that, and it becomes a kind of an average, or let's say a blending out of the data that you have available. And then you have extrapolation, but Daniel Bolojan uses the term for cycle GANs, where you are pairing off two unpaired data sets and, as it were, breeding, like a genetic algorithm, breeding an outcome that is generated out of those two. The key question then is really, how does this world of AI give us some inclination, some insight into how human beings operate? And it seems to me the crucial issue that I would ask is whether or not, in fact, AlphaGo was really doing something creative in the first place, or was it simply coming up with a very effective search? What, to my mind, the interesting aspect of AI is how it can become a mirror in which to understand human intelligence and human creativity.